Hello, I'm Mikey Campling, and in episode 15 of the Writing Talk podcast, we'll be having a quick run through of my latest news. Then we'll be looking at this week's main topic, which is all about meeting your characters and developing really great characters in your fiction. Then we'll be having a bit of listener feedback from last week's show and asking you for feedback for this week. And we'll be finishing off the show with a look at this week's Writer's Toolbox. Welcome to the Writing Talk podcast, a show that helps you to build your skills as we go on our writing journey together. Okay, well, since last week I've been getting into a new project, or rather I've been reinvigorating an older one. It's often tempting to get involved with too many projects at once, and there's always a danger that something new will entice you away from your main focus. It's great that there's such a vibrant writers community online, but it does mean there's always something going on somewhere, and it can be very tempting just to go for the lure of the new. It's just as well to be wary of this sort of thing, because when you're writing, especially if you're trying to get through a longer piece like a full-length novel, it's easy to become overwhelmed. You can take on far too much, and then if you do have to back out of something, then you might leave your readers disappointed, and you might leave some collaborators in a bit of a fix. But on the other hand, sometimes if you can see something has a useful end goal in sight somewhere, then it's good to get stuck into different things. It's nice to vary your work routines over a typical week or over a month or whatever kind of cycle you like to think of it in. For instance, if you're heavily involved in writing a novel or maybe a whole series of novels, having a period during the week when you can actually work on something different, say a non-fiction project, that can be really beneficial, especially if that work can later be used in another context. For example, it could be published in a book. So I'm paying a bit more attention to a site I'm involved in with a group of another writers. It's called thecollectivesci-fi.com, and there's several of us there writing sci-fi in our own different ways. And I may have mentioned before, we have a perma-free book that you can get, a short story really, called The God Machine, which is out there. You might want to check that out. And it's just quite a nice little tale. And I have gone back to that, working a bit more on that site. I'm trying once a week to put out a new little serial. It's a sci-fi story set on an alien world, and I'm going to try and put out a new episode every single week. And it's going to be both on the website there at thecollectivesci-fi.com and on Wattpad. So if you're into Wattpad, you can check it out there. There's a couple of episodes up already. The working title is just Conspiracy at the moment, but that will almost certainly change. That was rather off the top of my head. And in fact, the whole thing is it's a change for me because I'm kind of planning it out as I go along. Now, you might think, hang on a minute, if you've listened to some earlier episodes, that goes against everything that you've said. And you'd be quite right. But because I'm writing this story as a bit of a light relief, it's a break from my more intense writing, so that, I'm getting stuck into the third full-length novel of the Darkening Stone trilogy, along with the novella Breaking Ground, which is also free online everywhere. And that's, quite intense, quite. It's a lot of thought. There's a lot of research. It's kind of my higher prestige book, I think. It's kind of my baby. It's my thing that I really put an awful lot of work and thought into. And so coming up with a little episode of a serial once a week is actually a really nice little break for me, and I'm really enjoying it. It's kind of fun, and if it all goes well, I'll consider rewriting it and editing it and so on and putting it out. But it might just make it as a free download or maybe a 99-cent thing. I'll see how it goes. Depends how long it is and how much work I put into it. But at the moment, it's there as going to go up as a nice freebie. It's not to say that I'm rushing it off, that it's sloppy or shoddy work, because I would never do that, because you've got to value your readers, and your reputation depends on everything you put out. So of course I do work at it, but it's just something. It's short, it's self-contained. I'm only allowing myself, in other words, to write that one episode, and even if I feel like it, I'm not going to go write the next episode till the following week. So it's a slightly dangerous way to behave, perhaps, but it's just going out as a freebie. So it's kind of fun. It's worth a try, I think. And of course, one of the things I'm really enjoying about writing this new story is inventing the characters. And that takes us into the main topic of the show, which is meeting your characters. Okay, well, one of the most engaging, entertaining and thrilling aspects of writing fiction is the people you meet. And I don't mean the real ones. I'm talking about the people you create in your imagination. Where do they come from? What are they trying to tell us? What do they want? What will they be prepared to do to get it? All these are fundamental questions. We hold the fates of our characters in our hands. Literally, they live and die according to our whim. Oh, the power! So this is an area of your work where I want you to dig really deep, but I want you to have fun with it as well. Now, when I talk about digging deep, I'm not suggesting that you drum up an endless level of character background information. I mean deep in the sense of an intense emotional connection, and for that you have to open yourself up. Subconsciously, you'll be bearing your soul. It's just that you'll be using your characters to do it. I once listened to a well-known theatre actor being interviewed, and he told a story about a particularly intense role that he'd been playing. After the performance, a friend asked if he was okay. The actor replied that he was fine. In that case, the friend said, "You'll be able to tell me when your birthday is." The actor couldn't remember. He also had problems recalling a whole host of other small details from his real life, things like his wife's name and birthday and things like that. And he'd gone into the character so deeply that he'd effectively lost himself. And he realised that after each performance of this intense play, he needed to take time to decompress and sort of come back to earth. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go quite that far, but I do think that you need to enter a similar state of engagement with your characters if you're going to make them really come to life on the page, if you really want them to live and breathe for your readers. And this kind of engagement only really happens if you let it. But how do you get there? Okay, well, to me, this is all about daydreaming. It's about having the freedom to let a scene play out in your mind in several different ways without worrying about which one of them is right. The trick is to play with the scene or the situation until the character's actions feel right. So let's imagine a scene. Let's imagine a handsome young woman is alone with the man she's dreamed of for years. They're in a bar together. The music is loud and they sit close to one another so that they can talk. The woman's had a few too many glasses of wine on an empty stomach, and she flirts with the man, holding eye contact for a little longer than she should. No, scratch that. The woman is stone cold sober. She's tired from a long day at work. The man senses she wants to be alone. Perhaps she's a bit irritable with him when he says something to her, so he makes his excuses and leaves. No, scratch that too. This time, the man realises the lady is a bit tired, and he says he knows a nice little restaurant nearby. It's quiet and the food is good. We don't have to talk, he says, not if you don't want to. And so on. And they're all playing out in totally different ways with just different little reactions, different little changes. And these things, only take seconds to dream up. And you could do this sort of thing all day. You could play around with a simple scene like that absolutely all day, getting a feel for the way the characters behave by altering their interactions and playing with it until it feels genuine. It's very much a playful process. It's fun, it's imaginative. What this isn't is filling in a form or a pre-made character profile. I don't use them and I don't recommend them either. You know the kind of thing that you'll see them in places and they'll ask you all about, what's their favourite food or early memories and things like this. I mean, who cares? In that scene, who cares what the man's favourite food is or where he went to school? Who cares if the woman likes rhythm and blues or she once won a handwriting prize at school? I mean, not me, I certainly don't. So think about it this way. If we met, you and I, and you said hello to me, you wouldn't totally judge what kind of person I was from my history or from my taste in clothes say, you judge me on the things I said and did. I could be scruffy or smart or trendy or dowdy, but if you said hello to me and I smiled and said, lovely morning, you'd get a certain impression of me. But if I just glared at you in silence, you might feel quite wary of me. And if I burst into tears, you'd probably be quite disconcerted or alarmed, and so on. Again, you could play with that situation over and over again. So I think you've got to let your characters speak volumes through their actions. Let them walk and talk and rant and rave, or sing and smile. Let them breathe. But don't, for goodness sake, wrap them up in an arbitrary character profile. Leave the form filling to the bureaucrats. Go out and have fun with your characters. Make some new friends, literally, then make some new enemies. Having said all that, if you find that writing character profiles fires your imagination and encourages you to see your characters as real, then by all means carry on. I just think there is a danger with these things, is that they can become quite dreary, and you are in danger of producing a two-dimensional cardboard cutout character that you don't really feel engaged with yourself. And if you don't feel engaged with your characters, then why should the readers be engaged? Why should they care about them if they don't feel real? And that takes me into the next segment of the show, because it's time to get your feedback. So how do you get into your characters? Do you have a set technique, or do they just come to you sort of randomly? Do they arrive fully formed, or does it take you a long time to build them up? Do you know what they're going to be like right from the beginning, or does it emerge? Personally, I tend to kind of meet my characters as I go. I think I must have some subconscious kind of ideas about them, but I like exploring that, and I literally play scenes out. I mean, maybe that's why I'm a relatively slow writer, is I do like to play scenes out and say no, and I'll even type things up and sometimes just delete them again afterwards and rewrite it in a different way, because it just has to feel real. It has to feel in character. It has to feel genuine to me. So any comments on that topic would be very welcome, especially if you've got any tips you feel it could be helpful to other writers. So if you leave your comments on the post that has this podcast in it and the site at writingtalkpodcast.com. And as always, good tips and comments could be read out in next week's show. And if it's obvious, if you leave a link as well, I can link to your site. So if you've got an author website, for instance, or a blog somewhere, I can pop a link to that in the show notes. Okay, so this is the feedback from last week. And in last week, where the topic was about keeping writing when things are rough. So I asked for some comments and tips on that, and we actually got quite a few on how to keep writing when things are rough, or to get started again after you've had a break. Author Sherry Williams, and there'll be a link to her site in the show notes, says that after a break she utilises flash fiction to get writing again, usually via Chuck Wendig's site. Now I'll put a link as well to Chuck Wendig's site in the show notes. It's called, if memory serves me, terribleminds.com. And it's very popular with lots of writers, and I've in fact done exactly the same thing myself, because one of the things that Chuck does pretty much every week without fail is to put a flash fiction challenge up on Fridays, and I've had a go at some, as I said. Sometimes if I have time I join in. They're often fun, they're always interesting, they're always sort of different, and they're worth a look. And if you participate, you post your work up on your own site and put a link over on Chuck's site, and you might get some feedback from other writers. And of course, it's only fair if you do that you read some of their entries, and you might enjoy that, and you can give some positive feedback yourself. Okay, moving on. Author Deb Daniels LaRue, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and again a link to that site will be on the podcast show notes, says she likes to go back and reread a favourite scene that she's written, and she finds that gets her back into the swing of writing, and that's nice. If there's something you feel worked well, go back reading that one. Another one, we had a few this week. Julie Ryan says that she's got a collection of positive reviews that she has that are from people that she doesn't know personally, and so she likes to go back and read those reviews and just remind herself that there are real readers out there, real people who actually enjoy her work. So thank you for that, Julie. That's a great tip. And finally, writer Kelly Williams Also have a link on the site at writingtalkpodcast.com. She gave quite a long suggestion, but if I can sort of summarise it, the gist of it is to keep making game plans and so make sure she's just moving forward in the whole process. And also, Kelly says she continues to write her blog and to stay engaged with her readers via social media, just so she gets that connection with readers. And I would, totally endorse that. Feeling some sort of connection with readers is really valuable and really encouraging. And all of those were really great comments. So thank you very much to everybody who commented. If you commented sort of after recording, then I'm sorry, but I can only fit in so many in the time. So if there are other comments that you feel you'd like to leave, you can always come along and leave them on the site. And, you never know, they might help somebody else. So for this week's Writer's Toolbox, I'd like to set you a couple of little exercises that I hope will help you to visualise your characters. So take a character from something you're working on and just make them late for a very important event. It doesn't really matter what it is. You can either fill in that blank or leave it like that, just as long as it's something important. Now, for this exercise, you can scribble down some notes if you like, or you could just do the whole thing entirely in your head. But the idea is this, to play out that scene in more than one way. For instance, your character could deal with a situation by remaining very calm and decisive. What would they say and do in that situation? And then go on to have the same scene and same character, but this time they get very angry and very frustrated. Again, what could happen there? Or perhaps after that, you could even have them losing their temper entirely and just freaking out somewhere. Just play with that in those different ways. And more, again, it's the sort of thing you can do very quickly and over again. The next exercise is very similar. Do the same sort of process, but this time imagine your character bumps into an old friend and they have been quite close in the past but haven't seen each other for a while, and your character discovers that their old friend has hit hard times. So what does your character do? Is he warm and compassionate towards his old friend or her old friend, or do they try and distance themselves? What are their thoughts? Try and scribble down or imagine some of the thought processes going through their minds. Are they feeling very sympathetic, or do they feel, some revulsion towards the character because of the state they're in? Do they find the change in their old friend really hard to understand? Are they sort of struggling to comprehend it? Are they appalled at what's happened to them, or do they have a certain amount of schadenfreude? It's all totally up to you. There are no right or wrong answers. Now, if you'd like to showcase a bit of your writing by doing these exercises and being very brave and posting them up somewhere, then please post them on your own site. Again, it gives you a little bit of content, so it does something that's doing double duty, and your fans might be quite interested in seeing you play with some characters. Then post a link to your piece over in the comments on this podcast, episode 15, on the writingtalkpodcast.com site. Okay, well, that's it for this week. I really hope you found this episode useful and interesting. If you do enjoy it, then please share the podcast with your writer friends. For example, you could post a link in any of the writing groups that you're a member of. Also, please consider the podcast by subscribing. It really does make a lot of difference to whether I'm able to sustain this and keep it going if we have some subscribers. So I can't emphasize that enough. That would be wonderful. The show's on iTunes. It was broken a while back, but now that seems to be working again. And we're on Stitcher, and it also has its own YouTube channel where you can just listen to it. It's a static picture, but you can listen to it. But, if I believe in putting it out there in all possible ways, and then you partake of it in the way that suits you. You can also subscribe by some other methods over on the site at writingtalkpodcast.com. For example, you can subscribe via email and have each new episode emailed to you when it comes out. And there's other methods there as well. And you'll also get access, of course, on the site to the full, and certainly for the last few episodes, I'm doing very detailed show notes on the site. So it's really quite comprehensive. If there's something you want to just scan your eyes over rather than listening to the whole thing again and trying to find a snippet of information you've been looking for. So yes, so any shares, tweets, anything like that, very much appreciated. Thank you very much for listening and for all your support. So until next week, keep writing, keep tapping away at the keys, keep scribbling, and above all, keep smiling. Thank you and goodbye.